To the outside world, Julian Vance's life was a masterwork of design. As one of Chicago's most sought-after architects, he lived by a creed of structural integrity. A building, like a life, was only as strong as its foundation. Truth was in the materials, honesty was in the lines, and beauty was the inevitable result of a thing being precisely what it was meant to be. His own home, a sleek composition of glass, steel, and reclaimed timber nestled in a quiet Lincoln Park street, was a testament to this philosophy. It was a space of light and order, a physical manifestation of the world he had meticulously built for himself. The heart of that world was his family. His wife, Clara, was his perfect, beautiful counterbalance. Where Julian was all rigid lines and calculated angles, she was a fluid curve of chaotic, creative energy. A freelance artist who worked with vibrant, abstract canvases, she was a splash of brilliant color in his monochromatic world. She was his beautiful, tragic mystery, a foundling, she'd told him when they first met, the sole survivor of a car crash that had claimed her parents when she was just a child. She had no memory of them, no extended family, just a fragmented upbringing in the foster care system. Her past was a void, a foundation of smoke, and Julian had made it his life's mission to build a future for her, so solid it would make the past irrelevant. And then there was Owen. Their 8-year-old son was the keystone holding the arch of their lives together. He had his father's serious, observant eyes and his mother's wild, artistic spirit. To watch him on the living room floor, meticulously building a complex Lego structure while humming an improvised off-key song, was to see the perfect synthesis of their two worlds. On evenings like this, with the scent of Clara's oil paints mingling with the aroma of dinner and the soft glow of the city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Julian would feel a sense of profound, unshakable peace. He had designed this life. He had built it. It was strong. It was true. As their 10th wedding anniversary approached, Julian found himself wanting to give Clara more than just jewelry or a vacation. He wanted to give her something real, something foundational. He wanted to give her back a piece of the past she'd lost. He knew it was a long shot, a fool's errand, perhaps. Clara rarely spoke of her childhood, and when she did, it was with a vague, shimmering sadness that he was reluctant to pierce. But he imagined the joy on her face if he could find something, anything. A photograph of a childhood friend, a record from an old foster home, a single name that could anchor her history. The only clue he had was a name she'd let slip once, years ago, during a late-night conversation fueled by wine and nostalgia. Oak Haven, a small, forgotten timber town in rural Washington state, where she'd spent a few years in a group home before being moved again. She'd described it as a place of perpetual rain and towering pine trees that clawed at a permanently gray sky. That night, after Clara and Owen were asleep, Julian retreated to his studio. The space was his sanctuary, a minimalist room with a vast drafting table and walls lined with blueprints. It was a room dedicated to creating order from chaos. He opened his laptop, the clean white glow of the search engine, a stark contrast to the murky past he was about to delve into. He typed Oak Haven, Washington into the search bar. It felt like a transgressive act, a secret excavation of his wife's soul, but he told himself it was an act of love. He was an architect. He was simply trying to find the original blueprints of the woman he had built his world around. He had no idea that by digging for that foundation, he was about to unleash a seismic event that would bring his entire perfect structure crashing down around him. He believed he was searching for a sad, simple story of an orphan. He was about to find a monster. The search began as a slow, frustrating exercise in futility. Oak Haven, Washington, was little more than a ghost on the digital landscape. It was a town that time, and the internet had largely forgotten. The official town website hadn't been updated since 2008. There were no thriving community forums, no digitized public records to speak of. Julian's initial searches for foster homes or orphanages in the area came up empty. The institutions of Clara's youth likely closed for decades, their paper records lost to time, mildew, and indifference. For a week, Julian spent his nights falling down rabbit holes of genealogical websites and public records databases, his architect's mind chafing against the lack of order and verifiable data. He was used to dealing with the precise, unyielding laws of physics and geometry. The chaos of a human past, especially one so deliberately obscured, was a foreign and frustrating terrain. He found birth records for dozens of Clara Vances across the country, none of whom fit the timeline. He found himself staring at the faces of strangers, trying to see a flicker of his wife's features in faded high school yearbook photos from the 90s. He kept the project a secret, a hidden tab on his browser, a locked folder on his desktop. During the day, he was Julian Vance, husband, father, visionary architect, a man in complete control of his environment. He would discuss the tensile strength of steel with contractors and the flow of natural light with clients, all while a part of his mind was wandering through the damp, pine-scented streets of a town he'd never seen. Clara would sometimes find him staring into space, a pensive look on his face. "Designing another masterpiece in your head, honey?" she'd ask, kissing his cheek. He'd just smile, the lie feeling like a small, necessary stone in his shoe. His obsession grew. He felt like he was hunting a phantom. Clara's past wasn't just empty, it felt scrubbed. The more he searched, the more the lack of information seemed less like a product of time and more like a deliberate act of erasure. Who had no digital footprint in the 21st century? It was this anomaly, this violation of the expected order of things, that kept him going. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. He stumbled upon a link to the Oak Haven County Historical Society, a small, volunteer-run organization that had, in a fit of grant-funded ambition a few years prior, digitized 2 decades of the local newspaper, the Oak Haven Chronicle. The interface was clunky, the scanned pages often blurry, but it was a direct, unfiltered window into the town's past. He focused his search on the period 20 to 25 years ago, the time Clara would have been a teenager. He began to scroll through the digital microfilm, page by tedious page. The chronicles of small-town life unfolded before him. Bake sales, high school football scores, town council disputes over zoning laws, wedding announcements, and obituaries. It was the mundane, reassuring rhythm of a community talking to itself. He felt a pang of guilt. He was an intruder here, a tourist in the town of his wife's forgotten sorrows. He almost missed it. It was a small headline, buried on page 3 of a mid-October issue from 20 years ago. The text slightly skewed, but the words leaped off the page, grabbing him by the throat. Tragedy strikes Miller family in devastating house fire. His finger froze on the trackpad. It wasn't the story he was looking for, but a sudden, inexplicable instinct told him to read on. He clicked, and the grainy page zoomed into focus. He was no longer just an observer. He was about to become an archaeologist, unearthing a tomb that had been sealed for a reason. The article was brief, written in the terse, factual prose of small-town journalism. It detailed a horrific fire that had consumed the home of the Miller family on the outskirts of Oak Haven. The blaze, which had started late on a Tuesday night, had been so intense that by the time the volunteer fire department arrived, the 2-story farmhouse was little more than a roaring pyre against the black rural sky. Julian's eyes scanned the grim details. The bodies of the parents, Robert and Mary Miller, had been recovered from the master bedroom. Their son, a 12-year-old boy named Daniel, was found in the hallway upstairs. The article mentioned that the family had a teenage daughter, but this was where the story took a strange turn. The daughter, a 17-year-old named Sabrina Peterson, was officially listed as missing. Her remains were not found in the ashes. The local sheriff was quoted as saying it was presumed she had also perished in the fire, her body likely consumed by the inferno's extreme heat. A terrible story, but what did it have to do with Clara? Julian was about to click away to dismiss it as a morbid distraction from his real search when he saw it. At the bottom of the article was a single, low-resolution photograph. It was a school picture, grainy and washed out from years of being archived on microfilm. The caption read, "Sabrina Peterson, 17, missing and presumed deceased." Julian leaned closer to the screen, his breath caught in his chest. The heart of an architect, a man who had staked his life on the truth of what he could see and measure, began to hammer against his ribs. The girl in the photograph had a different name. She was part of a different family, a different tragedy. But the face, it was unmistakable. The wide-set, haunting eyes, the sharp line of her jaw, the specific, almost defiant way her lips curved, even in a forced school portrait smile. It was, without a shadow of a doubt, the face of his wife, Clara, as a teenager. A wave of vertigo washed over him. He felt the solid floor of his studio tilt beneath his feet. It was impossible. A coincidence. A trick of the light and the poor quality of the image. People had doppelgangers. It was a known phenomenon. He was a rational man. He built things that stood up to the forces of nature. He would not be toppled by a ghost on a screen. He closed the laptop, his hands trembling. He walked out of his studio and into the silent house. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching Clara sleep. Her face, illuminated by the soft moonlight filtering through the window, was serene, peaceful. The face of the woman he loved, the woman who painted canvases of joyous, chaotic color, the woman who read stories to their son in a soft, soothing voice. How could that be the same face as the one in the newspaper? A face connected to such a dark and violent tragedy. He went back to his studio and reopened the laptop, his heart pounding. He stared at the picture of Sabrina Peterson, then at a photo of Clara from their first year together that he kept on his desk. He toggled between the two images. The resemblance wasn't just passing, it was structural. The architecture of the face was identical. The foundation of his perfect world, the life he had so meticulously designed and built, had just sustained its first terrifying crack. It was a hairline fracture, almost invisible, but Julian, the architect, knew everything about structural integrity. He knew that even the smallest crack, if left unexamined, had the power to bring the entire edifice down. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had to keep digging. He had to know the truth, even if it destroyed him. For the next 48 hours, Julian lived a double life. By day, he moved through the world of blueprints and client meetings, his face a mask of professional calm. But his mind was elsewhere, in a smoke-filled farmhouse in a forgotten town, haunted by the face of a dead girl who looked exactly like his wife. By night, he descended into a feverish obsession, the anniversary gift forgotten, replaced by a desperate gnawing need for the truth. The low-quality newspaper photo wasn't enough. He needed something clearer, something undeniable. His search led him to the Oak Haven High School alumni website, a relic from the early days of the internet. After hours of searching, he found it. A digitized version of the yearbook from 20 years ago. And there she was, on the page for the junior class. Sabrina Peterson. This photo was clearer, professionally taken. The girl staring back at him from the screen was sharp and in focus, her expression a mixture of teenage boredom and a deep, unsettling watchfulness. And she was, unequivocally, the girl who would one day call herself Clara Vance. Julian felt a cold sweat prickle his skin. This was no longer a coincidence. He downloaded the image along with a recent high-resolution photo of Clara. He fed both into a sophisticated facial recognition and aging software he sometimes used in his work for security simulations. The program analyzed over 100 points of facial geometry, the distance between the eyes, the curve of the jawline, the structure of the cheekbones. He watched as the progress bar crept across the screen, each percentage point a tick of a terrible clock, counting down to a truth he wasn't sure he could bear. The result came back in seconds, a 99.7% probability match. The software then generated a composite image, artificially aging the 17-year-old face of Sabrina Peterson by 20 years. The face that stared back at him from the screen was his wife's. It was the face he kissed every morning. The architect in him, the man of logic and reason, was screaming for an explanation. Could she be a long-lost twin, separated at birth? Could the entire Peterson family story be a lie, and she was an orphan who just happened to resemble the dead girl? The possibilities were wild, improbable, but he clung to them as a drowning man clings to debris. His investigation shifted from the girl to the fire itself. He dug up every subsequent article he could find from the Oak Haven Chronicle archives. The official investigation had concluded the fire was arson. Traces of accelerant were found in the rubble. The case had been a local sensation for a few weeks. The prime suspect was the father, Robert Peterson. He was a man drowning in debt, known to associate with some unsavory characters from a nearby city who worked as loan sharks. The prevailing theory, though never proven, was that the loan sharks had set the fire as a brutal warning or punishment, and the entire family had been caught in the crossfire. the case eventually went cold. Sabrina Peterson was declared legally dead a few years later. The file was closed. But Julian, with his architect's eye for detail and structure, saw flaws in the narrative. The report mentioned the fire started in the father's home office on the ground floor, but the bodies of the parents were found in their second-floor bedroom, directly above it. Why hadn't they woken up? The son was found in the hallway, as if he'd been trying to escape. But Sabrina, whose room was at the far end of the same hallway, had simply vanished. It didn't make sense. The structure of the story was unsound. He felt he was standing at the edge of a chasm, the truth on the other side. He had gone as far as he could as an amateur. The questions were now too dark, too dangerous for a simple Google search. He was an architect, a builder. He needed a demolition expert. He needed someone who knew how to tear down walls and expose what was hidden inside. He opened a new browser tab and typed in a different kind of search: best private investigators in Chicago. He scrolled through the listings, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. This was the point of no return. He was no longer trying to give his wife a gift. He was investigating her as if she were a criminal. The thought was a betrayal so profound it made him feel physically ill. But the image of her face, matched with 99.7% certainty to a dead girl from a fire, was a truth he could not unsee. He picked up the phone. The private investigator's office was the complete antithesis of Julian's world. It was a cramped, cluttered space on the third floor of a walk-up in a grittier part of the city, smelling of stale coffee and cynicism. The man behind the desk, Detective Russo, was a former CPD homicide detective who had retired early. He was a thick-set man in his late 50s with tired, intelligent eyes that seemed to have seen every possible variation of human depravity. He listened to Julian's story without interruption, his face an unreadable mask. Julian laid it out carefully, omitting his personal connection. He presented himself as a concerned third party, an amateur genealogist who had stumbled upon a historical inconsistency. He spoke of the Miller family fire, the uncanny resemblance between the missing Sabrina Peterson and a woman he knew, a woman named Clara Vance. He presented the yearbook photos, the newspaper clippings, the facial recognition report. He framed it as a puzzle he was hoping to solve. What really happened to Sabrina Peterson? Russo looked over the documents, his thick fingers handling the papers with a surprising delicacy. He studied the two faces, his expression unchanging. "People look alike," he said, his voice a low gravel. "The world's full of coincidences, Mr. Vance." "A 99.7% match isn't a coincidence, Detective. It's a statistical impossibility," Julian countered, the architect in him needing to assert the data. Russo leaned back in his squeaking chair, his eyes fixed on Julian. "You're paying me a lot of money for a historical puzzle. What's your real stake in this? Who is Clara Vance to you?" The directness of the question disarmed Julian. He hesitated for a moment, the truth catching in his throat. "She's my wife." The admission hung in the stale air. Russo's expression didn't change, but Julian saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not surprise, but a weary recognition. He had seen this story before. The perfect life, the hidden secret, the spouse who starts pulling at a thread and finds a monster attached to the other end. "Okay," Russo said, his tone shifting from skeptical to serious. "Now we're talking. I'll take the case. Give me 2 weeks. And Mr. Vance, try to act normal. The most dangerous time is when they know you're looking." The next 2 weeks were a special kind of hell for Julian. He lived in his own home like a spy in enemy territory. Every loving gesture from Clara, every innocent question, felt like a potential trap. He watched her paint, her face a mask of concentration, and wondered what horrors were hidden behind those serene eyes. He watched her tuck their son into bed and felt a surge of primal fear. Who was this woman sleeping next to him? Who was the mother of his child? The call from Russo came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. "I have something," the detective's voice said over the phone. "You should come to my office." Julian sat across from Russo's desk, the rain streaking down the grimy window behind him. The PI slid a thin file across the desk. "Your wife, Clara Vance, has a perfectly clean record," Russo began. "Social security number, driver's license, credit history. It's all there. On the surface, she's exactly who she says she is." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. but her paper trail only starts 20 years ago. Before that, nothing, just like you found. Russo leaned forward. So I stopped looking for Clara Vance and started looking for anyone connected to Sabrina Peterson, and I found her. He tapped the file. There was another girl in Oak Haven, a girl who was also in the foster system, a quiet, bookish girl who was Sabrina Peterson's best and only friend. Her name was Clara Sterling. Julian's blood ran cold. They were inseparable, according to the few people I could track down who remembered them. Then the fire happened, and right after the fire, Clara Sterling disappeared. No one thought much of it. She was a foster kid. They get moved around, people assume she was relocated, but there's no record of her being transferred, no school enrollment anywhere else, no social security activity after that date. Just like Sabrina Peterson, she vanished off the face of the earth. Russo let the silence stretch, his tired eyes boring into Julian. So now we have two teenage girls who disappear at the exact same time. One is presumed dead in a fire, her body never found. The other simply evaporates. And 20 years later, a woman with the face of one girl and the name of the other is living in a high-end home in Lincoln Park. He closed the file. This isn't a case of a runaway who changed her name, Mr. Vance. This is something much, much darker. I don't know what the hell happened in that town 20 years ago, but your wife is at the dead center of it. I need more time, and you need to be very, very careful. The PI's revelation sent Julian into a tailspin. He was no longer just dealing with a lie. He was caught in the gravitational pull of a conspiracy, a dark, 20-year-old mystery involving two missing girls. The image of his life with Clara, once a masterpiece of clear lines and honest light, was now a distorted, menacing canvas. He began to see duplicity in everything she did, the way she'd quickly change the subject if a news report mentioned a house fire, the way she had no old friends, no photo albums from before she met him, the small, isolated world she had built around their family, once a source of comfort, now felt like the walls of a cage. He paid Russo to keep digging, to find the final, terrible piece of the puzzle. Julian knew, with the cold certainty of a man watching a building condemn itself, that the truth would be devastating. He just didn't know how completely it would annihilate him. The final report came not as a phone call, but as a thick, sealed envelope delivered by courier. A note from Russo was clipped to the front. Read this alone, then call me. We need to talk about your next steps. That night, Julian waited until the house was still, the rhythmic breathing of his wife and son, the only sounds in the darkness. He went to his studio, the one place he still felt in control, and broke the seal. The report was a dense clinical narrative of Russo's investigation, but it read like a gothic horror story. Russo had traveled to Oak Haven. He had spent days talking to retired cops, old neighbors, and former classmates. He had pieced together a portrait of Sabrina Peterson that was nothing like the tragic victim from the newspapers. Sabrina was not a happy teenager. Her father, Robert Peterson, was not just a man in debt. He was a violent, abusive alcoholic. He ruled his home with fear, and Sabrina had been his primary target. The town knew, in the way small towns always know, but no one intervened. The loan sharks were real, and they were closing in. Robert Peterson, in his desperation, had offered them something other than money, his own daughter. The deal had been made. Sabrina had overheard it. She knew she was about to be sold to monsters to pay her father's debts. This was the context for the fire. It wasn't an attack from the outside. According to Russo's new theory, pieced together from a re-examination of the arson report and a conversation with a guilt-ridden former deputy, the fire was an escape plan. Sabrina Peterson had set the fire herself. She had used an accelerant to burn down her own prison and kill the man who was about to sell her. Her mother and brother were collateral damage, victims of her desperate scorched earth bid for freedom. Julian's hands trembled as he read the next part. His vision blurred. Russo had uncovered the story of the other missing girl, Clara Sterling. She was Sabrina's only confidant. The night of the fire, Sabrina had confessed her plan to Clara. She was going to burn everything down and run away, start a new life. But Clara, horrified, had refused to go along with it. She had threatened to go to the sheriff. She was the one loose end, the one person who knew the truth. Russo had found a witness, an old man who lived down the road from the Peterson farm. He remembered seeing Sabrina's truck drive towards the old abandoned quarry on the edge of town the night before the fire. He'd thought nothing of it at the time. Acting on a hunch, Russo had convinced the current sheriff to search the quarry, which was now filled with water. They hadn't found a body. It had been too long, but they had found a weighted-down, rotted suitcase at the bottom. Inside, preserved in the cold, oxygen-deprived water, was a high school letterman jacket. The name stitched on the front was Sterling. The final page of the report laid out the unavoidable, monstrous conclusion. Sabrina Peterson, to ensure her escape, had murdered her best friend, Clara Sterling. She had hidden the body, then set her family home on fire, and in the chaotic aftermath, she had walked away, free. She had traveled across the country, and, in a final ghoulish act of erasure, had stolen the name and identity of the girl she had killed. Julian dropped the report, the papers scattered across the floor of his studio. The architect, the builder, the man of truth and structure, was gone. In his place was a hollowed-out man staring into an abyss. The woman he had loved for a decade, the mother of his child, the vibrant, free-spirited artist named Clara Vance, had never existed. She was a ghost, a stolen identity. The person sleeping in his bed, just down the hall from their innocent son, was Sabrina Peterson, a survivor, yes, but also an arsonist, a murderer, a monster wearing the face of his wife. The knowledge was a poison, spreading through Julian's veins, turning his blood to ice. He sat in his studio for what felt like hours, the scattered pages of the report like funeral shrouds on the floor around him. The silence of the house, once a comfort, was now menacing. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind outside, sounded like a footstep from the monster down the hall. He knew he couldn't let it go. He couldn't live another day inside this lie, sharing a bed with a killer, letting her read bedtime stories to his son. The architect in him, the part that craved order and truth, demanded a reckoning. The foundation of his life was not just cracked, it was a pile of rubble, and he had to confront the saboteur. He gathered the report, the photos, the newspaper clippings. He arranged them on his large drafting table, a clinical, damning exhibit of a life dismantled. He then walked down the hall and into their bedroom. He gently shook his wife awake. "Clara," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, "we need to talk. In my studio." She awoke with a soft murmur, her eyes fluttering open. She saw the look on his face, the grim, hollowed-out expression, and the sleepiness vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp wariness. "Julian, what is it? What's wrong?" "Just come with me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. In the studio, the single lamp over the drafting table cast a harsh, interrogative light on the evidence. Clara, or whatever her name was, walked in, wrapped in a silk robe. She saw the papers laid out on the table, her eyes scanning the headlines, the photos. She froze. Her gaze darted from the picture of the Peterson family to the yearbook photo of Sabrina, then finally to the face of Clara Sterling. Julian watched her, waiting for the facade to crumble, for the tears, the denials, the confession. He got none of it. What happened next was the most terrifying transformation he had ever witnessed. The soft, artistic, vulnerable woman he had known for a decade seemed to recede, dissolving like a watercolor in the rain. In her place, someone else emerged. Her posture straightened. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a look of cold, flat assessment. The line of her jaw hardened. It was like watching a mask being slowly, deliberately removed. When she finally looked up at him, her eyes were the eyes of a stranger. "So," she said, her voice a full octave lower than he was used to, stripped of its gentle melodic quality. It was a voice of cold, hard stone. "You found me. I have to admit, I'm impressed. How long did it take you?" The casual, almost congratulatory tone of her question struck Julian like a physical blow. Who are you?" he stammered. "You know who I am," she replied, picking up the yearbook photo of Sabrina Peterson. She looked at it with a strange detachment. "I'm a survivor, Julian. That's what I've always been. I did what I had to do to get out, to live." "You killed them," he whispered, the words tasting like ash. "You burned your family alive." "My father was going to sell me to animals to pay his gambling debts," she said, her voice sharp, cutting. "He made his choice. My mother and brother, they were casualties of a war I didn't start. It was them or me. I chose me." "And Clara?" Julian's voice cracked as he pointed to the photo of the other girl. Clara Sterling? Was she a casualty too? She was your friend. For the first time, a flicker of something, not remorse, but a cold annoyance, crossed her face. Clara was weak. She was sentimental. She would have sent me back to my father. She made her choice too. She tossed the photo back on the table. She gave me a gift in the end. Her name, her story. It was a blank slate, much cleaner than mine. Julian stared at her, horrified. There was no grief, no guilt. He was looking at a void. The woman he had shared his life with was a sociopath, a predator who had wrapped herself in the skin of a victim. Our life, our marriage, Owen, he began, his world crumbling. Our life was good, wasn't it? She said, a chillingly calm smile touching her lips. We were happy. Owen is a wonderful boy. I've been a good wife to you, Julian, a better mother to him than mine ever was to me. Does it really matter who I was before? The question was so monstrous in its simplicity that it stole the air from his lungs. She truly believed it. She believed that 2 decades of lies, built on a foundation of arson and murder, could be compartmentalized and dismissed. She believed the beautiful structure she had built with him was sound, even though its cornerstones were the bones of the dead. Julian felt a profound, sickening disconnect, as if the reality he had known had been a meticulously crafted stage set, and the back wall had just been torn away, revealing the cold, empty darkness behind it. He was not talking to his wife. He was talking to the thing that had replaced her. Does it matter? He echoed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Of course it matters. It changes everything. You're a murderer. You've been lying to me every single day for 10 years. The calm, chilling smile on Sabrina's face vanished, replaced by a look of cold impatience. Don't be so dramatic, Julian. You're an architect. You of all people should understand. The original site was toxic. I cleared it, laid a new foundation, and built something beautiful and strong. You, me, Owen. This is what matters now. The past is just rubble. You buried bodies in that foundation, he shouted, his control finally snapping. The body of your best friend. My God, our son is sleeping down the hall. He has the blood of a killer running through his veins. He has my blood, yes, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. The blood of a survivor. And I will do anything to protect him, to protect us. She took a step closer, invading his space. The scent of her perfume, a scent he had always associated with love and comfort, now seemed cloying and venomous. So, now you have a choice to make, my brilliant architect. This is your design too now. You know the truth. That makes you a part of it. She laid out the ultimatum with the cold precision of a surgeon. Choice 1. You accept it. You burn these papers, you forget the names Peterson and Sterling, and we go on. We continue to be the Vances. We raise our son. Our perfect life continues, uninterrupted. You will be my partner in this, my silent, knowing accomplice. Julian stared at her, speechless. The audacity of the proposition was staggering. Or, she continued, her eyes locking onto his, there's choice 2. You decide you can't live with it. You decide your precious principles are more important than your family. If you make that choice, Julian, I promise you this. I will disappear, and I will take Owen with me. You will never see your son again. I've vanished once before. I am very, very good at it. A cold dread, sharper and more immediate than anything he had felt before, seized him. She meant it. She would take his son. You wouldn't, he whispered. Wouldn't I? She said, a flicker of that monstrous smile returning. I burned my family in their beds to save myself. I killed my only friend to secure my freedom. Do you really think I would hesitate to take my son from a man who was threatening to destroy the world I built for him? You are just an obstacle, Julian, and I have a long history of removing obstacles. The threat was no longer veiled. It was a declaration. He saw it now with terrifying clarity. He wasn't married to a victim. He wasn't married to a liar. He was married to a predator, and in her eyes, he was now prey. His investigation, his righteous quest for the truth, had not set him free. It had backed him into a corner with a monster, and she had just made it clear that she would destroy him before she let him expose her. He looked past her, down the darkened hallway, towards the room where his son was sleeping, and he knew this night would not end in a simple choice. It would end in a fight for his son's life. The ultimatum hung in the air, a toxic cloud that filled the space between them. Julian's mind, usually a bastion of logic and order, was a maelstrom of terror and fury. The architect was gone, replaced by a father, a cornered animal desperate to protect his young. He looked at the woman before him, this stranger named Sabrina, and saw not the mother of his child, but a kidnapper, a threat so absolute it eclipsed everything else. "You will not take my son," he said, his voice a low growl he didn't recognize as his own. Sabrina's expression hardened. The pretense of negotiation was over. "You don't get to make that decision anymore, Julian. I'm his mother. I will do what's best for him." She turned, her movement swift and decisive, and started to walk out of the studio. "I'm packing a bag for us. We're leaving tonight." A primal surge of adrenaline shot through Julian. He couldn't let her get to Owen's room. He couldn't let her take him. He moved, blocking her path at the studio doorway. "You're not going anywhere." For a moment, they stood in a tense standoff. Then, Sabrina lunged. She was surprisingly strong, her movements fueled by a feral, desperate energy. She clawed at him, trying to push past. Julian, taller and stronger, grabbed her arms, restraining her. The struggle was a clumsy, horrifying dance in the dimly lit hallway. It was a silent battle, both of them instinctively keeping their voices down, not wanting to wake the boy sleeping just feet away. She twisted in his grip, her face contorted with rage. "Let go of me! You are ruining everything!" she hissed. And with a surge of strength, she broke one arm free and grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from a nearby console table. She swung it wildly, catching him on the side of the head. Pain exploded behind his eye, bright and searing. He staggered back, his vision swimming. Sabrina saw her opening and bolted towards Owen's room. That single, terrifying image of this monster reaching for his son's door cleared his head in an instant. All thought, all morality, all sense of the man he used to be vanished. There was only one imperative: stop her. He lunged, tackling her from behind just as her hand touched the doorknob. They crashed to the floor, the paperweight flying from her grasp and skittering across the hardwood. She writhed beneath him, kicking and scratching like a trapped animal. Her hand found the leg of a heavy steel and wood side table he had designed. She gripped it, trying to pull it down on top of them. Julian saw her intent. He reached out, grabbing her wrists, trying to pry her fingers loose. They were locked in a desperate, straining tableau of violence. In that moment, he looked into her eyes. He saw no fear, no remorse. He saw only a cold, reptilian will to survive, at any cost. He saw the same eyes that must have watched a farmhouse burn, the same eyes that must have looked upon a dying friend without pity. And in that instant, he understood. She would never stop. She would take his son. She would hurt him if he got in her way. She was a structural flaw that could not be repaired. She had to be removed. His grip on her tightened. He pushed her back against the floor, his forearm pressing against her throat to stop her from screaming. It wasn't a plan. It was an instinct. A terrible, final solution to an impossible problem. Her struggles grew frantic, then weaker. Her eyes, wide and staring up at him, held a look of final, shocking disbelief. And then, they were still. The silence that descended upon the house was absolute, a crushing weight. Julian remained frozen, his body still covering hers, the warmth slowly fading from her skin. He could hear his own ragged breathing, the frantic, guilty thumping of his own heart. He had just killed his wife. He had just killed the mother of his child. Slowly, he pushed himself up. He looked down at the still form on the floor, then at his own trembling hands. There was no panic. The rage and terror had receded, leaving behind a terrifying, empty clarity. The architect's mind, the part of him that saw problems not as emotional crises but as structural challenges, took over. He had a new project, a terrible one. He was no longer a builder of homes, but a constructor of lies. He had to deconstruct this crime, hide the flaws, and build a new reality around it, a reality where he was the victim, not the killer, a reality where his son could grow up safe, free from the monstrous truth of his mother, and the even more monstrous truth of what his father had just done to protect him. The design began to form in his mind, cold, precise, and flawlessly executed. In the dead of night, Julian Vance's home transformed from a crime scene into a design studio. The project was not one of creation, but of meticulous deconstruction and fraudulent reconstruction. His grief, his horror, his guilt, he walled them off, burying them deep in the foundation of his mind. All that remained was the architect, the problem solver, armed with a blueprint for the perfect crime. His design had to be more than just a plausible lie. It had to be a compelling narrative, one that leveraged the very truth he had just unearthed. The loan sharks from Sabrina's past, the men who were supposed to be her father's killers, would finally get their due. After 20 years, their hunt for the Peterson family's sole survivor had come to a violent end. It was a story rooted in fact, which made the fiction he was about to build all the more believable. His first step was to remove himself from the equation. He put on a pair of latex gloves from under the kitchen sink. Working with the cold precision of a surgeon, he moved Sabrina's body, staging it near the front entrance to suggest a confrontation with an intruder. He was careful, forensic in his awareness, conscious of every fiber, every hair, every potential piece of DNA he might disturb or leave behind. Next, he built the narrative. He went to his computer and, using a privacy-focused browser, accessed the dark web forums he had read about. He found what he was looking for: chatter about old-school enforcers, names associated with organized crime in the Pacific Northwest from 2 decades ago. He printed a single page containing a few of those names, a planted clue for the police to find, a breadcrumb leading them down the path he had designed. Then he staged the forced entry. He went to the sliding glass door in the back of the house. He didn't just smash it. An architect knows how things break. He used a pry bar from his workshop to splinter the frame, mimicking the brute force of a determined intruder. He was careful to apply the pressure from the outside, creating the correct fracture patterns. The interior was next. It couldn't be a random ransacking. It had to be a search, a targeted one. He focused on Clara's, on Sabrina's art studio. He overturned canvases and scattered sketchbooks, but he left his own valuable equipment untouched. He took a small hidden lockbox from her closet, a place she kept old mementos. He pried it open and removed a few small, insignificant items, leaving the box empty and discarded on the floor. They were looking for something specific, something she had taken from her father. The story was building, layer by meticulous layer. The final, crucial element was communication. The killers needed a motive beyond just silencing a witness after 20 years. He took Sabrina's burner phone, a device he had discovered she kept hidden. He composed a short cryptic text message and sent it to a random, deactivated number. The message read, "I know you're looking. The ledger is safe. Stay away from my family." He then used a hammer to smash the phone, leaving the pieces near the body. It was the inciting incident. She had provoked them. They had retaliated. It was almost 4 a.m. His work was nearly done. He took off the gloves, wiped down every surface he might have touched, and conducted a final, critical walkthrough of his creation. Every detail was in place. Every clue pointed away from him and towards the ghosts of Oak Haven, Washington. His performance had to be as flawless as his design. He went upstairs and checked on Owen, who was still sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the fact that his world had been irrevocably shattered. Julian then went to his own bedroom, splashed water on his face, and practiced the look of terror in the mirror. He picked up his phone and dialed 911. He pitched his voice to the perfect frequency of panic and hysteria. "My wife!" he screamed into the phone, the sound echoing in the silent, waiting house. "Someone broke in! They hurt my wife! Oh my God, I think she's dead! Please, send help!" He hung up and sank to the floor, the first act of his new life as the grieving widower complete. As he waited for the sirens, he felt a strange, chilling sense of accomplishment. He had created a flawless design. But as the first distant wail of the sirens grew closer, a single cold thought pierced his calculated calm. Every structure, no matter how perfectly designed, has a potential point of failure. He could only pray he hadn't overlooked one. Detective Russo arrived on the scene just before dawn. He was a man who operated on instinct and patterns, and after 30 years of wading through the aftermath of human violence, his instincts were razor sharp. he surveyed the pristine Lincoln Park home, the scene of choreographed chaos, and the architect, Julian Vance, who was playing the part of the devastated husband with almost too much precision. And immediately, Russo felt that something was profoundly wrong. The crime scene was, on the surface, a perfect narrative. The forced entry, the targeted search of the wife's studio, the cryptic text message, the planted list of old-time criminals, it all pointed to a professional, retaliatory hit, a ghost from the past coming to collect a debt. The first responding officers had already bought it completely, but to Russo, it felt less like a crime and more like a carefully constructed proof. It was too clean, too logical. Murder was messy, chaotic, emotional. This was designed. Russo's suspicion of Julian wasn't based on evidence. It was based on its absence. Julian's story was seamless. He claimed he'd been working late in his soundproof studio and had come out to find the scene. It was plausible. But his grief felt rehearsed, his answers too coherent for a man who had just lost his wife. Russo, a student of human nature, knew that true shock shattered logic. It didn't refine it. The investigation proceeded along the path Julian had laid out. The NX detectives flew to Oak Haven, Washington, to chase the ghosts of 20-year-old loan sharks. But Russo stayed in Chicago, and his investigation focused not on the crime, but on the victim. He began quietly digging into the life of Clara Vance, the artist with no past. And the deeper he dug, the more he felt that the real story wasn't about the loan sharks. It was about the woman herself. The crack in Julian's perfect design came from a small, insignificant detail he could never have anticipated. While the Chicago detectives were hitting dead ends in Washington, Russo, acting on a hunch, requested the original, complete case file of the Peterson family fire. Buried deep within the appendices was a list of personal items inventoried from Sabrina Peterson's childhood bedroom. Most of it was typical teenage ephemera. But one item caught Russo's eye: a small hand-carved wooden bird, noted as a gift from her best friend, Clara Sterling. Russo returned to the Vance house, which was still a sealed crime scene. He walked through the stage chaos of Clara's art studio, and there, sitting on a high shelf, almost hidden behind a stack of canvases, was the very same small, hand-carved wooden bird. It was the fatal flaw. Why would a professional killer, a ghost from the past, seeking revenge or a hidden ledger, leave everything of value but take the time to place a small, sentimental trinket on a high shelf in the middle of a ransacked room? It made no sense. But it made perfect sense if the person staging the scene was a grieving husband who, in a moment of subconscious remorse, couldn't bring himself to discard the last, innocent remnant of the person his wife used to be, the real Clara Sterling, whose identity she had stolen. It was an act of emotion, a single note of chaos in an otherwise perfect symphony of logic. Russo brought Julian in for questioning again. He didn't present the bird as evidence. Instead, he talked about architecture. He talked about stress points and structural integrity. He talked about how even the grandest buildings can be brought down by a single, overlooked flaw in the design. He then placed a photo of the small wooden bird on the table between them. "I found this in your wife's studio, Mr. Vance," Russo said, his voice quiet. "A professional hitman wouldn't have cared about this. But a husband might. A husband might see it and remember the story of a girl named Clara Sterling. The real Clara Sterling." Julian stared at the photograph. The finality of his mistake washed over him. He had designed the perfect fortress, but he had left one small window open, a window that looked directly into his own guilty soul. The architect, the man of structure and order, finally broke. The walls he had built around his emotions came crashing down, and the terrible, agonizing truth poured out in a torrent of confession. In the end, Julian Vance's masterpiece of deception had failed. He had built it to protect his son, but a foundation laid with violence and lies can never be truly sound. The truth, like gravity, will always find a way to pull it down. He had set out to build a perfect life, but in his desperate attempt to protect it from one monster, he had been forced to become another, proving the most tragic architectural principle of all. Sometimes, the greatest threat to a structure comes not from the outside, but from the fatal flaws hidden deep within the architect himself.